Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. It is my delight, my honor. I use the word delight a lot, apparently, to be to be talking with comics creator Paul Pelletier. Paul, thank you for jumping in, joining, and is that a doppelganger behind you? Is that a version of yourself right there?
Yeah, it's a banner I use for conventions, and it was actually a sketch that Scott Eaton did of me, artist Scott Eaton did of me, probably about 20 plus years ago, and it was
Nice.
really small, but it captured me perfectly, so I had to blow it up and use it for my banner. So,
I love it. I love it. That banner and I have a lot in common. That could also be me. So I love
you know,
it. That's
well,
super
a lot of
awesome.
us comics creators kind of have a similar look too, so I mean,
Yes.
it's funny how that happens.
Yeah, yeah, and apparently it spills over to the readership. I guess in
There
this
we
case at
go.
least.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
yeah. Um, so I normally start out by mentioning several titles, but you have worked on a lot of popular characters, a lot of mainstream characters for DC in particular, and several for Marvel. The Flash, Green Lantern, Titans, and then Exiles for Marvel being a couple of those titles that bubble up without me looking at my notes. Superman, of course, Batgirl. So you are quite well established in the world of comics and creating. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Were there particular characters that sort of introduced you to the comic space when you were a younger person?
Yeah, I think the first Marvel comic that really got me addicted to superhero stuff was a friend of mine introduced me to the X-Men back
Mm-hmm.
when it was Claremont, Byrne, and Austin, and John Byrne became the first huge influence on my artwork. So that was the book that pretty much got me hooked.
Yeah,
So, yep.
that's a great one to start out with. And then, at what point did you know that comics were going to be the space for you, that you would be finding creative outlets there?
Probably late high school. That's it's I had some other friends that were interested in comics and we were trying to do our own thing. And I think by junior, senior year in high school, that's I had figured out that that's what I wanted to do. So and you could tell because I was a really good student up until senior year when I realized, man, I want to draw comic books, and all of a sudden my grades went boop. Because I knew what I wanted to do, and I started to put my focus towards that. And through luck and hard work, I managed to, about 4 years later. You know, I never went to school for artwork. I mean, I had a couple years in high school,
Oh
but
wow.
as far as comic book art, I'm self-taught. And so it took me about 4 years after high school before I was able to start doing comics full time.
And I'm picturing your life in that 4 years because I was also a person that took some time in between high school and adult life to kind of figure some things out and practice and do some things. So I'm just picturing you like sketching, drawing, like perfecting your craft in that time.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say perfecting, but at getting better at it. I grew up in Maine. That's where I live now, and in between high school and when I started working professionally in comics, I worked with a couple small black and white publishers here in Maine.
Hmm.
So, even though I was working jobs in a shoe factory or washing dishes or whatever I could do to pay the bills, I had an outlet. It wasn't just sketching on my own. I was drawing comic books, so I was learning how to storytell and to be an effective artist in comic books. So I had a goal, so that was great. Even though I wasn't making any money on it,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
just and being around other creative people too really helped out a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the work of DC and Marvel and superheroes is it's such interesting science fiction and really action oriented and high concept stuff. What's it like to sort of approach a script or a page and then try to envision that and put it down in pencil and ink?
It can be a challenge sometimes. A lot of younger artists that I meet that are interested in drawing comics, the first thing I tell them is, you want to draw comic books, get ready to draw a lot of stuff you don't really want to draw.
Right.
And especially if you're working with a writer, if you're not writing your own stuff, then you're trying to translate somebody else's vision.
Hmm.
And sometimes, the stuff that they want on the page isn't exactly what you want to do, but hey, to tell the story, you pretty much have to follow it. But some of it can be really daunting because there are, some writers I've worked with, will delve into like scientific theoretical stuff that's
Hmm.
really kind of hard to try and translate artistically on a page. So, I mean, and like you said, I've worked on so many different titles that I'm kind of pulled in different directions. So, it can be a challenge, but you know, I'm 30 plus years later, I'm still doing it. So,
Hmm.
obviously, I enjoy that challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And in addition to the science concepts, you get fun things like horses and cars and the things that everybody loves to draw, right?
Yep. Or, just a quiet scene in a living room with people talking. I mean,
Mhm.
because I view kind of what we do as comic book artists as being like a director in a film. But
Mhm.
you're not only a director, you're the set designer, you're the costume designer, you're technically the actors because you're drawing the expressions on these characters' faces. And not only do you have to design the room, but you have to have it fairly consistent at different angles because you're not showing the same angle every time. So there's a lot of problem solving involved in drawing comics, and I think uh, when I see younger kids or artists who were interested in drawing comics and they only draw like a splash page or cover shots,
Mhm.
well, see that you're avoiding all the if you're doing page by page, panel by panel storytelling, there's a lot of problems to solve doing that. So it's and again, it can be a fun challenge. It could be maddening sometimes too.
Mhm.
But overall, I mean, if telling stories is something you really enjoy doing, then you kind of get a kick out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm thinking also about the spatial skills that you have to have, thinking about rooms from different perspectives and making sure that it makes sense to the reader to go from one part of the room to
Yep.
another part of the room. Yeah.
Yep. And one of the projects I'm working on right now, it's with a gaming company, and their big thing is doing miniatures.
Hmm.
And they'll create some really intricate costumes for some of these miniatures, which is fine for creating a miniature. But when you have to draw that costume consistently from all angles over and over again, it's like, oh, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge.
Yeah.
So, like you said, like keeping a room consistent. And then on top of it, you also have to make sure you're leaving room for word balloons. And
Mm.
so, like I said, it's problem solving, constant problem solving.
Yeah, yeah. Any particular sort of experiences or collaborations that bubble to the surface as being some of those sort of fun challenges that you've
Interview.
experienced? That's right.
Well, I was going to say back in 2001, I was invited to join CrossGen Comics, and I don't know if you're familiar with that company.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was the only company in the comics world where everybody worked in the same studio. The
Yeah.
writers, the artists, inkers, colorists, letterers, production people, everything was all in-house. So up until that point, I had always worked by myself. So being thrown into a studio situation was completely new. But just being involved, being able to sit down with the writer himself, it was Tony Bedard on our book Negation,
Hmm.
and actually having the inker and the colorist there too, and we're all throwing ideas at each other and basically building a world from scratch. That was an incredibly fun situation to be involved in. So yeah, I think that was probably one of the most fun artistic endeavors I was part of because I was really involved more in the actual I mean, I wasn't writing the book, but I was much more involved in the
Hmm.
process of creating stuff. And there were times where I would get the script from Tony, and then I'd sit down with the inker Dave Mikas and James Rochelle, who was the colorist, and we'd go through the script and we'd start changing things. Let's do this here and do this there. So it was a lot of fun. So I think that creatively was probably one of the most fun times I've had in comics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, imagining what it must be like to work on, again, these shared characters and licensed universes of being like, here's a room full of toys, plus you get to add some versus you create the room, you create the toys, you create how they work. That's a
Right.
really cool thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's daunting at the same time, but just being involved in that kind of situation was unique. I mean, that's usually one of the questions I get from a lot of other creators in comics that knew I was part of CrossGen. It's like,
Hmm.
"Oh, what was it like? And was it really a cult?" Or it's like, no, 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 no. It was just a studio full of comic book people, and we just, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned working in the world of gaming, so I'd like to ask about uh, current projects, current things that you can talk about, as well as spaces like online or in person where you like to connect with readers.
Well, the gaming stuff, I did a graphic novel called The Others for Cool Minis or Not,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I finished that over a year ago. It's still being colored. It's a 120-page graphic novel, and hopefully that'll be seeing print sometime this year. I'm working with them again on the tie-in for one of their games, and I think they're planning on releasing a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive comic. That's what I'm working on. So I'm not really going to divulge who the characters are and whatnot, but
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
for them. And last year I spent most of the year working with a video game company called Lethos, and I was doing a book for their game Trace War. So I did 6 issues of that. So I mean, technically, I haven't had any comics on the shelves in almost 2 years.
Hmm.
So it's going to be announced pretty soon that I'm working on GI Joe for Skybound and Image.
Oh,
So it'll be
fantastic.
nice to have something on the shelves again. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
But most of the time is talking with readers and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I don't do that many shows, but that's usually the best time to be able to meet people and talk about what I've worked on and where I'm going and whatnot.
Hmm.
And I've got a website that people want to send questions. They can always do that too. So yeah, because I have little to no social media
A
exposure. So
wise man.
yeah, well, yeah, I've survived so far without it, so I'm going to see how far I can go. But yeah, I think my website's paulpelletierart.com. So it's simple enough, which I think that's how you contacted me. So that
It is indeed.
the word gets around a little bit. So
Yeah, yeah. And I'll be sure and link it in the podcast description and the video and all of those things. Did we miss anything in the talk through that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
um, no, I mean, I mean, working on different books and different writers, it always poses new challenges. And there are some guys like Dan Slott, when I
Hmm.
was working on She-Hulk and Great Lakes Avengers. He was one of my favorites because his sense of humor taps right into my own. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's always fun to work with a writer that you can connect with. I loved working with Jeff Parker on Aquaman.
Hmm.
His sensibilities. He's got a great sense of humor and his sense of adventure when he writes his comics.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to get that collaboration where you really are in sync with the writer. So and then hopefully someday maybe I'll come up with my own thing. So yeah, I'm never really good with coming up with initial ideas for a project, but I'm pretty good at expanding on them.
Hmm.
So I just gotta sit down and figure out, all right, what do I want to do? What kind of story do I want to tell and actually do it? But I'm so busy drawing all the time that it makes it tough.
Yeah, well, glad that there's still plenty on the vision board and looking forward to the stories to come. And I appreciate your time and your work so very much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.